As you are the chief economist for the South Asia region, you might have gone through the case of Sri Lanka. In fact, I'm sure that you have gone through it thoroughly. What you found, what was the main reason behind the Sri Lankan economic crisis, and what should we learn as a neighbor country? What should we learn from a Sri Lankan economic crisis, Dr. Ames?
One is a large accumulation of debt that was ultimately unsustainable. Secondly, a policy to reduce the tax revenues.
Okay.
A bit more than 2 years ago, the government reduced the tax rates with 25%.
Yeah.
That created a huge fiscal deficit, and that ultimately was unsustainable in a macroeconomic sense. And the third reason was that there was a tendency to react with ad hoc measures to the problems that were emerging.
And Dr. Ames, is it possible that World Bank and other development agencies to directly channelize the loan through bank and financial institution instead of giving it to government? Dear viewers, Namaste, I am Manoj Paudyal. Welcome to the program Banking Serophero, a typical banking program of Nepalese television industry. It's a presentation of a complete banking and financial solution, Banking and Financial Solution Private Limited, Kathmandu, Nepal. Dear viewers, today we are going to present you the Chief Economist for South Asia region of the World Bank, Dr. HANS TIMMER. Let's welcome Dr. TIMMER in the program Banking Serophero. Sir, welcome to the program Banking Serophero.
Thanks for inviting me.
We are so very happy to have you here at our program, and thank you so much for your valuable time, sir.
It's really my pleasure to be back in Nepal. It's my first time since the start of COVID.
Okay.
And I always enjoy the hospitality of the people in Nepal.
Thank you so much.
It's really nice to be here.
Thank you so much. Sir, I'd like to start the program as you are the chief economist for the South Asia region of the World Bank. I hope and I think you have gone through the economic condition of this region. How you found the overall economic situation of Nepal?
These are difficult times, clearly. It is one shock after another. And now recently we had the increase in commodity prices, especially the food prices, the energy prices, and that increases the cost of living for people. Yeah. That is tough, but it generates also macroeconomic problems. That comes on top of an environmental crises. Climate change is no longer a theoretic concept, it's here with us. The landslides recently in Nepal, floods, and that all comes on top of COVID, which was a once in 100-year pandemic, where the economy came almost to a standstill, a sharp contraction, many people lost their jobs, the life of migrants was upended. So these are difficult times, but when you compare Nepal to the rest of the region that I'm working in, then Nepal is in a relatively good shape. Okay. However difficult it is. Think about Pakistan with the floods, 1,500 people killed, millions and millions that lost their home. Think about Sri Lanka, a full-blown macroeconomic crisis, a balance of payment crisis. Nepal is in a relatively good shape, partly because it has not accumulated a lot of debt in the past. It has still a lot of remittances, which for households is a buffer to absorb new crises. And also it is not as dependent as other countries on the import of energy. And actually high energy prices in the medium run are an opportunity for Nepal, because potentially you can increase your hydropower production and other renewable energy.
Okay. Sir, in a post-COVID context, people are suffering from increased inflation. And actually, people are struggling for the survival. In this context, World Bank has any new initiative for the better livelihood of people?
Yeah, indeed. That's the consequence now of the higher food prices, higher commodity prices. That is a huge challenge. As I said, it comes on top of other crises. What we are doing is to try to learn from those crises and to come up with better policies, working together with the government. And one important lesson of all these crises is that households, especially the poorer households, they don't have the tools, the buffers to cope with these kind of crisis. They have to become more resilient, and at the same time the whole economy has to become more resilient. So together with the government we are working on what is called the green resilient inclusive development strategy that is based on those learnings to make sure that we are better equipped to absorb the environmental challenges, to become more resilient, and to become also more inclusive, so that not just the government but also the people can cope with these scopes. So what we are doing in that framework of the grid, the green resilient inclusive development, we have new programs. This week we signed 2 programs at an amount of total 450 million. That is to develop further the digital technologies in Nepal that helps improve the productivity of many people, that makes them more resilient. And the other program was to improve connectivity. That helps also people to get better access to markets and make them more productive. At the same time, we are working with the government to have more targeted social safety nets, so that in the most efficient way we support the people who are most vulnerable. But also in the very short run, on almost kind of emergency relief, we are active. For example, at the height of the COVID crisis, when many people lost their job, we reprogrammed medium-term programs on the labor market to use, I think, 23 million for immediate creation of temporary jobs for young people, so that you don't have a lost generation. So we work with the government and we work for the people to address these challenges that you just mentioned.
Dr. Hams, as commodity price is growing day by day and Nepal is hit hard further, so how can we mitigate this increased commodity price?
So how to deal with the higher commodity prices?
Yes.
I think, first of all, it is important not to ignore reality. You can't wish away the problem. This is a problem. It comes from the outside. It leads to lower real incomes in Nepal. And there's no way you can avoid that. That means that you can't try to just fix the prices and prevent the prices going up. That makes the problem only worse, because it leads to larger fiscal deficits. It leads to larger deficits on the current account. You can't also compensate everybody for the higher cost. That is also not possible. So what do? You focus on the most vulnerable people. and you use the social safety net to support those people so that they can cope with the higher prices, and at the same time you use these price signal to benefit also from higher prices, so that you adjust to the new reality. That means that for suppliers it can be an incentive to increase their supply. That is true in agriculture. Now for many farmers it becomes more profitable to compete with the foreign providers of food, because these prices have come up. For energy production, renewable energy production, there's now an incentive to increase production also. On the demand side, when you use the prices, there is an incentive to become more efficient in your use of these commodities, so it increases energy efficiency. So it is very important not to ignore it, to let the prices give the signal, and then to adjust the economy so that you have a new equilibrium. If you adjust well, then you will end up in a situation where you become more competitive also in other products, and you can reduce your imports of more luxury goods because of the price changes that come with the adjustment, and you become more competitive in your exports also.
Okay, and Dr. Hans, is it possible that World Bank and other development agencies to directly channelize the loan through bank and financial institution instead of giving it to government?
Yeah, that is possible, at least for the World Bank Group, because the World Bank Group consists of different entities, and we have one entity that is called IFC, International Finance Corporation.
Okay.
They invest directly in the private sector, they invest also in banks, and actually, if I remember well, last fiscal year, IFC has invested in Nepal $45 million into 2 banks, and the purpose of that investment was to enable those banks to service small and medium enterprises, which was difficult to start with, and I think with that investment they reached some 64,000 small and medium-sized enterprises, so that's very important. But it's not just that investment by itself, because always when IFC invests in the private sector, it has a leverage function. It enables then other investors to also come in. There are still some changes needed in Nepal to allow other private investors to come in and support the banks, but it is quite possible. So to answer your question, yes, it is possible, and yes, it has been done. And in my view, it is incredibly important, because the solutions ultimately are not coming from just supporting the government. The solutions are coming from broadening the private sector, making it more competitive and more productive.
Okay, and Dr. Hans, as we are a developing country, Nepal, we need foreign direct investment. How can Nepal attract foreign direct investment, FDI? What do you suggest?
It's first of all making sure that the legislations, the rules are not prohibiting it. And as far as I understand, there is a change in the rules now, not yet implemented, but it is coming, that also smaller investments become possible. That is for a small country like Nepal with a large diaspora, very important. There can be very effective small investments in Nepal. So that is one thing, the legislation, making sure that there are no obstacles for foreign direct investment. But the other one is to have a good business climate and to have a level playing field, to have predictable business environment, so that people are willing to come in and don't face a lot of uncertainty and feel they have a fair chance to compete with the existing private sector. I think there are lots of opportunities there. It is linked to your previous question on supporting small and medium-sized enterprises and the financial sector, because I think ultimately the future growth is coming from unleashing the potential that is there in these small enterprises, potential that is not being utilized. And that can be unleashed in part by increasing foreign direct investment. Currently, it is very small. I think it is less than 1% of GDP, and that is very small compared to other countries at the same level of development.
Dr. Hans, we are almost in the end of the program. I would like to add one question. As you are the chief economist for the South Asia region, you might have gone through the case of Sri Lanka. In fact, I'm sure that you have gone through it thoroughly. What you found, what was the main reason behind the Sri Lankan economic crisis? How the Sri Lankan economy got failed? And what should we learn as a neighbor country? What should we learn from a Sri Lankan economic crisis, Dr. Hans?
Yeah, there were many reasons behind the crisis. It didn't help that there were also the external shocks to Sri Lanka, COVID, the fall in tourism. That didn't help, but there were domestic causes also. That was, first of all...
Which was the major cause?
I want to mention three. One is a large accumulation of debt that was ultimately unsustainable. Secondly, a policy to reduce the tax revenues.
Okay.
A bit more than 2 years ago, the government reduced the tax rates with 25%.
Yeah.
That created a huge fiscal deficit, and that ultimately was unsustainable in a macroeconomic sense. And the third reason was that there was a tendency to react with ad hoc measures to the problems that were emerging. So when you see inflation rising, then there were price controls, and you don't solve it, you only make it better. When there were current account deficits emerging that couldn't be financed on the capital account, you saw that they started using the foreign reserves. That ultimately doesn't solve it. When there were problems to finance it, there were restrictions on imports, suddenly a ban on fertilizer imports, for example. So what can Nepal learn from that? First of all, we all should realize that Nepal is in a very different position. There's no chance that very soon something like Sri Lanka will happen here. That's mainly because there is no debt issue, and also in other areas the situation is much better. But there are two things that warrant some attention. One is that the fiscal deficit here is rising, and that seems to be a structural increase. And that is probably related to federalization, the federalism, and there are many good reasons for that, to finance the provincial level and the local level, but at the same time the revenues are not increasing and the spending at the national level is also increasing. That's not a problem if that's temporary. If it is not temporary, then you create a problem, a fiscal problem that ultimately will also lead to balance of payment problems. The other one that warrants some attention is attempts to micromanage ad hoc measures to react to tensions on the balance of payments. For example, what you have seen in import bans at the moment, it is logical that you want to reduce the imports of luxury goods, but the experience is that it is much better to do that with financial, with price initiatives than in blunt bans. So those are two things that Nepal should be careful with, but overall the situation is so much better in Nepal. There's prudent monetary policy at the moment, and there's a very good dialogue with the government on other policies also. I'm leaving tonight from Nepal. My takeaway is that Nepal is in a much better situation than most other countries in the region.
Thank you so much, sir. At last, do you have anything to say to the viewers who are watching this program?
No, I want to repeat what I said in the beginning, that it is a pleasure to be here. There's this enormous hospitality, and I see a lot of potential also. I just gave a talk this morning at Kathmandu universities. Smart students, interesting discussions. They have lots of ideas. That's the future of the country. So I see these opportunities there. We had a field trip to Pokhara, where you saw the positive impact of empowering the local level, part of federalism. And that was not just translated in the governance, but people in the private sector suddenly saw new opportunities, working also with the World Bank in enabling the connectivity that they need. We met with a lady that has built up this company that is doing a lot of the digital technologies for Hollywood movies, state-of-the-art work. So, of course, we are always concerned about macroeconomic problems. We are especially concerned about hardship for vulnerable people. That's where all our focus is. But ultimately, we all want long-term development, more opportunities for people. Those opportunities are here in Nepal.
Okay. Dr. Hans, once again, thank you so much for your valuable time.
It was my pleasure.
Dear viewers, with this interaction with Dr. Hans TIMMER, the Chief Economist for South Asia region of the World Bank, we have come to the end of the program. Until we meet next week, please give us a leave. Have a great time ahead. Thank you. Namaste.
बैंकिङ सेरोफेरोका साथमा
नेपाल बैंक लिमिटेड, नेपालको पहिलो बैंक, पाइनियर बैंक विथ कम्प्लिट बैंकिङ सोल्युसन।
सन्तानको विश्वास आमा, आमाको विश्वास गरिमा, गरिमा विकास बैंक, एक्सेस टु अल।
सबैको सुरक्षा एनएलजी को इच्छा, एनएलजी इन्स्योरेन्स कम्पनी लिमिटेड।
कृषि विकास बैंक, तपाई हाम्रो घर आँगनको बैंक।
कामना सेवा विकास बैंक, प्रगतिको आधार, कामना सेवासँग कारोबार।
सम्पूर्ण बैंक तथा वित्तीय समस्याको समाधान,
बैंकिङ एन्ड फाइनान्सियल सोलुसन प्रणाली।
अर्थ राजनीति सम्बन्धी खास खबरका लागि अर्थराजनीति.com